absolutely blown away by this turnout. I did not expect this. But this is very exciting for me. I live in Trumbull. I've lived here for almost 30 years. And for the last 3 years, I have been launching pollinator pathways all over the state of Connecticut and New York. And I've kind of saved the best for last. So I got all the kinks out in the other towns. There's 85 towns in Connecticut now that are on the pollinator pathway or have launched a pollinator pathway in some shape or form. And this is the first meeting for Trumbull. So this is our first launch, and this does my heart good because I did not think we would have a turnout like this. So, very proud of you guys. So, I'm the chair of the Trumbull Conservation Commission, and I have, as I said, I've been here for a long time and worked in the Trumbull Land Trust when it existed, which it doesn't exist anymore. And I've been on the Conservation Commission for about 10 years. And this Pollinator Pathway initiative was started 3 years ago. And it started as a landowner outreach project for a conservation group that I was working with. And we never thought that it would take off the way it did. So the presentation tonight I designed to just give, the first half is an overview of what a pollinator pathway is and why we're doing this. And then the second half of the presentation is how we will do this in Trumbull. So there are 6 very specific steps that we have vetted in all these towns that have really worked beautifully. And it's all about forming a team in the town. So that's how I'm going to do the presentation. And then I'll leave, I should be a half hour, 45 minutes. Now we're going to leave 15 minutes for questions. So, the first question is, what is this all about? So a pollinator pathway is actually a corridor of public and private properties that provide native plant habitat and nutrition for pollinators. So in Trumbull, we are very fortunate to have a lot of beautiful parks and a lot of open space. And our park superintendent, Dimitri Paris, is here tonight. So we're going to thank him for all this beautiful work. What do we have? The highest ratio, what is it? The highest per capita parks in the highest number of parks per capita in the state of Connecticut. That's what it is. Highest number of parks per capita in the state, so we should be proud of that. And on this slide, those are our green spaces. They're protected. The open spaces are protected. And in between are the blue spaces, which are our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods, our homes. And what we've been trying to do with these pollinator pathways is make connections in this way. So putting corridors in there, and the way we do the corridors is each house, each town in a neighborhood begins to work on individual homeowners changing the way they treat their backyards and their front yards. And so one by one we begin to connect across the landscape, and before you know it, we have municipalities and property owners creating pesticide-free, healthy yards and public spaces for pollinators, pets, and families. So that's what a pollinator pathway is. And why are we doing this? So I've promised myself that I'm not going to focus on all the doom and gloom, and there is an awful lot of it out there, and it does nothing but make us upset because we feel helpless, like we can't do anything about this, but we can. But what is getting people here tonight, and in all the towns I go to, from Simsbury to New London to Greenwich, I get crowds like this that show up because people are reading the articles in the New York Times about the insect apocalypse. And the populations globally are crashing. The monarchs are down 90% in the last 20 years, but the good news is the eastern monarchs last year were up 441%. Wow. So that tells us that we can change this, we can turn it around. Farmers and the Natural Resource Conservation Fund has been working with farmers to plant more milkweed and more buffers of native plants, and it's turning around the populations. The West Coast populations, unfortunately, are still down. There's an awful lot of farms in that West Coast area, strawberries, the almonds, and they rely on pollinators, but they're spraying pesticides, and so it's affecting the monarchs that are going across the landscape as well. Overwintering colonies are down, the bumblebees are declining. The last one on there, the German study, which was done over 20 years, found a 76% decline in all flying insects since 1989. So, you remember we used to drive around and we'd get bugs smushed on our windshields, and we don't get that anymore? That's why. And there's a lot of things that are causing this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about things that we can do to change, and things that are going to happen at a national and global level to make changes. But people are aware and people are concerned. In the state of Connecticut, we have a huge group of different species of bees. There's over 349 species. Most of them are bumblebees, solitary bees, mason bees. The solitary bees and the bumblebees rarely sting. So when we are talking about having the pollinator pathway sites at schools, people worry about the kids getting stung. It's typically the wasps and the honeybees will sting because they are trying to protect a hive. Any kind of bee that comes in a larger colony has to sting to protect its hive. But most of our bees are solitary, so they don't sting. You could take a bumblebee in your hand and probably wouldn't sting you unless you smushed it on your face or something. But the honeybees are not native to the United States. They're native to Europe. They were brought over. They're European, they're Italian, they're imported. And they are not as good pollinators as our native bees are. They don't work as hard. If it rains, they don't come out. Very particular. And most of our crops, the crops that we eat, are pollinated by our native bees. So the honeybees want the nectar, our native bees want the pollen too, and that's what is so important. So the threats to our pollinators that we see are, number one, climate change. Things are blooming out of sync with when the pollinators are moving across the landscape. So the queen bees come out, let's say in March, they come out of the ground. If we had a warm season, those early blooms occurred in February. So they're out of sync, and that's why climate change is throwing things off. Pesticides and lawn chemicals, of course, that goes without saying. Fragmentation, light pollution, and invasive plants. We've got all kinds of invasive plants that have come in with the climate change, things that are showing up that we've never seen before, and they're pushing out our native plants. The invasives are pushing out our native plants. So the other threat is the fragmentation, like I suggested, and why we need to create something, a pollinator pathway here in Trumbull, is because fragmentation in smaller private ownerships and lawn culture is not a hospitable landscape for our native bees, our native insects, our native birds. This is like an alien landscape that we're creating. So when we see this from the air, we think, how can we reconnect this? And that's what the pollinator pathways are trying to do across the broad landscape. So we can reconnect these landscapes, the protected ones, like our parks, by making our properties, our homes, stepping stones that allow a free flow across the landscape. The species move across a healthy landscape, and when there's native plants there, they will stop over. If you see on the bottom, that is a pretty good illustration from the air. If I were flying over, whether I'm a pollinator or a bird, I would go to that house in the middle, and that's in the fall. So they've got a lot of native shrubs, a lot of native grasses, and they're connected to what looks like an old tree farm. So this is an example of a stepping stone, where there's a house connected to something that is an open space. It allows for a movement across the landscape. And so that's the illustration on top, is what a fragmented habitat looks like and a connected habitat. So if you think about sidewalks in Trumbull. So sidewalks, may end in a very dangerous place. So you can't cross, or there's no sidewalk on the other side. So what do? We turn around and we go home and we get our car and we go get our food. But wildlife and pollinators and birds can't do that. They just can't get across, and they get stuck in these fragmented areas, and then they go extinct because they can't get out. They can't get to places where there's food and where there's nesting. So if you can change the way you landscape your backyard, you will create these sidewalks across the landscape and improve the biodiversity that you'll see in your land. So the story of the Connecticut Pollinator Pathway started in 2016. As I mentioned, there was a project in Wilton. This H2H means Hudson Housatonic, and it's this massive landscape of conservation partners, conservation commissions, land trusts, in that huge landscape, so from Shelton all the way to the Hudson River. And we formed this partnership, and we started meeting over a couple of years, and we said, this is great. We're looking at maps. We see where these corridors could be, but we have to outreach to landowners to teach them what to do in their own backyards. So we came up with this concept of the Bee Highway. And in the picture, that was from Connecticut Magazine in September. It was really nice at age 57 to finally be a centerfold in Connecticut Magazine. It was the centerfold too. I went to Stop and Shop and I opened the magazine. I was pretty embarrassed. But these are the 4 people who started this Pollinator Pathway in Connecticut. On the left is Louise Washer. She's the executive director of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. Donna Merrill in the blue is the executive director of the Wilton Land Trust, and then there's me, and then there's Kim Stoner, who's our state entomologist. She is a bee expert. I call her our queen bee. And what she has done, in addition to helping us launch the Pollinator Pathway, she wrote the Connecticut Pollinator Protection Law, which is one of the first laws in the country to restrict the use of neonicotinoids in the state of Connecticut. And so that was done in 2016 thanks to Kim Stoner. It's a highly toxic pesticide. You cannot find it on the shelves of Home Depot anymore, but landscapers who are licensed can use it if they need to. But for us, it's restricted. The other part of the law was to encourage the DOT to plant on their landscapes native grasses, native plants, native shrubs, and we've had a lot of the pushback of the buffers on the Merritt Parkway and a lot of our roads, and this law is a mandate to the DOT, and they are doing it. They have well over 100 test sites in the state looking at native plants that work well on our state roads. And it saves money, and it's just something people are going to have to get used to looking at. It's not going to be as mowed looking as it used to be, and they're trying to make changes. But they are the largest landowner in the whole state of Connecticut, DOT. So if they can transform our state road into native plants, it will make a big difference. So in 2017, it's actually 3 years ago, 17, 18, 19, 20, 3 years ago this month was the first launch of the Pollinator Pathway in Wilton. And we had 2 speakers come in, and it just took off from there because we had people from other towns come. And so like tonight we have some folks here from Monroe. So our neighbors in Monroe want to do this, and we need to connect across the landscape. So this map over here shows all of these sites, whether they're big or small sites that have been planted with native plants in the Norwalk River watershed. So it actually spread from Wilton, and now we are up to over 85 towns in Connecticut and New York. And so this is just Fairfield County. As you see, Trumbull is not in there yet, but we will be. I can put it in tomorrow. But this is how we first started to design these pathways. We were looking at the landscape, and some towns wanted coastal. Some towns like Darien said, the whole town's on the Pollinator Pathway. There's going to be no corridors. Everybody's going to do this. And now Westport has changed. Their whole town is on the pathway. Fairfield, whole town on the pathway. Weston, Easton. So I think the way to go for us is to just say, all of Trumbull's on the Pollinator Pathway. But these are a lot of towns, and I think as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the towns that I've gone to do these launches in, there's this many people in the room. They just come. I don't promote this. They just call me, and I don't get paid for any of this, and nobody gets paid for this. We are all volunteers across the state. So this is a totally volunteer initiative. And because I get crowds like this, it gets me really excited to want to continue to do it. It's very inspirational to see that people want to learn and they want to make changes that will make a difference. And the other reason these pollinator pathways have worked so well is because they are a very scalable model. And what that means is if you live in a condo, you can put a pot on your deck. If you have a big yard, you can do a little 5x5 garden, or you could do a 1/4 acre. Land trusts, schools, municipalities, cemeteries, things that we don't even really think of as open spaces are utility rights of way, which will always be our utility rights of way. Those are great opportunities to plant some native plant mixes in there. In Trumbull, what we would like to see, and what I know Dimitri and I have talked about this for over a year, is Twin Brooks. The meadow there, he's been working on that for a really long time. That can be ground zero for the pollinator pathway, and it's a great location for education because there's the kiosk that's in the meadow, and there's another kiosk up above. So it's a great place to have outdoor classes. And he's worked really hard on that meadow. So it's a great opportunity to begin to look at species of the bees that are showing up. So the other reason that pollinator pathways have worked so well is because the messaging is really simple. So we've learned that there's basically 3 things that people can remember to do, not 5, not 10, 3 things. And these 3 things are really important. Number 1, rethink your lawn. So that could mean anything. Reduce the size of your lawn, don't mow it as much, use organic lawn care practices, integrate clover, could be anything like that. Actually, I'm delighted that Mo Green is here today because Mo Green has been my lawn guy for 2 years, and they are 0 emissions lawn care. So all their equipment is battery electric powered, so it's quiet. There's no, even the leaf blowers are quiet. There's no emissions, and they're very careful about the way they mow the lawn. And it's exciting to see businesses like this emerge, like small businesses that start, they're based in Fairfield. And they can help you to rethink your lawn. They can help you to integrate clover into your lawn. Our grass seed used to have clover in it. And the reason it was in there was because clover is a nitrogen fixer. It takes nitrogen from the air, pulls it into the roots and then into the soil, so you don't need nitrogen fertilizer. And our fertilizer companies figured that out. So they said to the seed companies, we're going to kill the clover, and we don't want you planting clover. So now we're putting it back in because we don't want to fertilize, and it stays green, and it doesn't require as much water. So that's an example of rethinking your lawn. The second thing is plant native plants. Native plants bring the pollinators, the birds, and they increase the biological diversity of your land. I'm going to go into this a little bit more in terms of understanding what native plants are. Number 3, avoid pesticides. I don't know when we ever thought that a yellow sign like that on the lawn was okay. I really, I don't want adults, dogs, or children on my lawn with a big arrow through it. And why would we saturate our land, my backyard, my front yard, with poisons? I just don't know. I have never in 29 years, put pesticides on my property or herbicide. Just never did it. Long before it was even cool to not do it. I just couldn't understand. I live on a lake, and I actually read the bags, and they said it's toxic to aquatic systems. So I'm like, no, this is going back. Just read the labels, and that's the problem. People don't read the labels. They assume because it's on the market that it's safe, and it's not. I worked in the biotech pharmaceutical industry for 20 years, and I know that it takes 15 years for a drug to come to market. pesticides and the chemical industry are not held to the same standards. They are allowed to release things onto the market without full safety testing. And this is why we're in the situation we are now, because they do not test those products the way that pharmaceuticals are tested. So in Europe, they have to be tested safe before they're launched, but here it's the reverse. So we're very trusting as Americans. We trust in our FDA, and we trusted in the FDA and the EPA, and sadly, they were not doing what we had hoped that they were doing. And so now we're facing living in a world without insects, and if there's no insects, there's going to be no people. So I'll go through each one of these. Rethink your lawn. Somebody sent me this and I just thought it was so funny. Are you still dressed like this? Well, then why does your yard still look like this? This concept of lawns, is very 17th, 18th century from England and the estates. And a friend of mine just sent me a picture of Kensington Gardens in London, and they have no-mow grass. So they have long grass with paths woven through it. So even in England, they're not doing this anymore. So, just boxwood's dying. It's getting fungus on it, and grass is just really a wasteland. It doesn't provide habitat, and when you put a lot of pesticides on it, it becomes toxic. So again, rethink your lawn, mow less frequently, reduce the size, add some clover, create a mini meadow, avoid pesticides, of course, leave the leaves or mow the leaves instead of blowing them, mow the leaves into your lawn. That is one of the best things you can do for your lawn. It adds nitrogen and it reduces the weeds. And then go electric. So in Minnesota, they actually are paying residents now to grow bee-friendly lawns. So that's pretty impressive. So we have a nursery here, and I don't think David's here tonight, but David Benjamin, who owns Wakeman's White Birch Nursery up on 25, did a test last year. In his front lawn, he replaced along 25 with a clover lawn. And there's his sign, and no chemicals. And it's beautiful. His lawn was beautiful. He did all clover. So he sells clover seed, and he is turned into a very organic landscape company and nursery. So he's going to end up being a good partner for us in the Pollinator Pathway, because he will get the native plants that we need. He will be the one to go to get the native plants. So why are lawns causing problems? I just like this slide because if you look at the root systems of all these native plants that are in meadows or on the side of roads, their root systems are substantial. And they hold the water. When we're getting flooding, Trumbull Center, it's asphalt to almost to the edge of the Pequannock. That's why Trumbull Center goes underwater. Turf grass is almost like asphalt. If you look way over on the left, you see turf grass has virtually no root system. It's almost like green asphalt. And it just doesn't offer really any habitat at all. And then again, when you put pesticides on it, it becomes toxic. So homeowners typically use 10 times the amount of pesticides and fertilizers per acre on their lawns than farmers do on crops. So not only are we using more pesticides on our lawns, lawn is the #1 crop in the United States. It has surpassed wheat, it has surpassed soybean. Over 40 million acres of land in the continental US has some form of lawn on it. That is the largest crop in the United States. It doesn't feed us, it doesn't provide habitat, it's just flat and green, and it's just a phenomenon that we got addicted to. And it's time to turn this around. From coast to coast, really time to turn it around. I don't know if you can see, but Long Island, New Jersey, right where we live, I mean, it's like lawn. I grew up in Long Island, and it's lawn city. Lawn and railroads, that's it. So lawn also uses tons of water. This is from my friend Louise Washer, who said that 40% of the water is used outdoors in Fairfield County, but in the summer that number goes to 70% of our water from Aquarian goes to lawns, and nationally sucks up 9 billion gallons of water per day for something that's providing no benefit. And you know, in some cases we're draining, they're pumping out of like the Norwalk River or the Saugatuck to go into the reservoirs for lawns. It's kind of crazy. Avoiding pesticides and chemical fertilizers. Just on the table over there I have a lot of this information encouraging you to kind of spray yourself instead of your yard. Landscape to repel ticks. Barberry is one of the major plants. Is that me? Okay, it's like I was timing myself. Barberry, University of Connecticut did a study on barberry, and barberry is not native, it's Japanese. It's got those little red berries on it and spikes on it, and it is invasive. So if you go on hikes in any one of our parks or woodlands, you will see barberry in the woods, by the streams, and it is an area of dampness and shade, which is exactly what ticks like. So the ticks thrive in the barberry, and that's also a location where the white-footed mouse, which is the source of the Lyme disease, hides under the barberry because there's spikes on it, so they're protected from predators. So you've got like the perfect storm of ticks and our little white-footed mouse, that's the source of the Lyme disease, all hanging out under the barberry. And the University of Connecticut did studies in woodlands where they removed barberry and the tick population plummeted 80%. Oh. So this is what you need to look at, changing your landscape. There's a new product called tick boxes, which I think is pretty cool. It might be very expensive though, but I don't know. They're little boxes that the white-footed mouse goes in, or the chipmunks go in. There's a little tiny bit of insecticide in there like you would put on your dog or cat, just titrated down to like mouse size, and they just walk through and they get this insecticide repellent on them, and the ticks don't go on them. So it broke the vector between the tick and the white-footed mouse. And there's studies on these tick boxes that the population and the incidence of Lyme was really dramatically decreased because you've done, you know, you've severed that link between the Lyme bacteria and the, you know, and the tick itself. So there's a lot of really smart people out there trying to come up with really cool solutions. So it, you know, it does my heart good that we're finding options instead of spraying the heck out of our properties. And the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station is like ground zero for tick research. And Kirby Stafford, who's the doctor there that does all the research on ticks, is finding that garlic oil is one of the best repellents, better than some of the peppermint oils or the cedar oils. Garlic oil is really working very well repelling ticks. And then when you plant native plants, you attract beneficial insects. And the reason I wrote skeeter hawk here is to remind me that skeeter hawks are another name for dragonflies. Because dragonflies eat so many mosquitoes that down south they're called skeeter hawks. So if you start spraying, you're going to kill your dragonflies and you're going to kill the skeeter hawks. So when you bring native plants in, the native insects come in and they begin to balance what's in your backyard. Because the native plants and the native insects have been linked for billions of years, genetically. They're supposed to go together, they need each other. And what we've done is disconnected them by either using the pesticides and killing the insects or by planting non-native plants and removing the native plants. And so we disconnected it. And what this Pollinator Pathway initiative is reconnecting those. By bringing the plants in, the insects will come back and then it will balance out. And then possums. Possums eat 5,000 ticks a season. So not only are they really cute, they're really clean. And that's why they eat all they just literally suck the ticks off of them. So the ticks go on them, they're attracted to them, and they eat all the ticks. So possums, you want possums in your backyard. They're like the poster child for tick eating. So, so here's a little pesticide policy action alert. we have a couple of bills here that, and not to get too political, but there are two bills that you guys should look into to support a ban on chlorpyrifos, which is a neurotoxin, very toxic pesticide that our US EPA was poised to ban in the United States. And the new administration came in and reversed that. It is a very toxic pesticide for humans, and so it goes without saying for our pollinators and our insects as well. So we've been asking for 2 years to get a ban on chlorpyrifos at the state level, so we're hoping that this year it will go through. Some states have something which allows the state or the actual individual towns to ban pesticides. So we in Trumbull could say, we don't want anybody using chlorpyrifos in Trumbull, and we're going to ban it. Kind of how the plastic bag ban went, right? It started town by town by town, and then the state goes, oh, all right, we'll ban it at the state level. For some reason, that's how things work in our state. We have to show at the town level, 169 municipalities have to say, we don't want plastic bags, we don't want chlorpyrifos, we don't want neonicotinoids. And then the state will roll over. But there's a law here called pesticide preemption, which means we cannot, in our towns, decide our own fate. We cannot decide what pesticides we want and what we don't want. The pesticide companies have written this law, and it takes our voices away. So the other legislation that we need to push through this year is to end this pesticide preemption and allow our towns the right to make decisions about pesticides and applications in their own towns. It's just giving us more choices, that's all. It's giving the decision back to us, not the state. So really it comes down to your choice. Either you're going to have those yellow signs on your lawn, or you're going to have a Pollinator Pathway sign on your lawn saying that you use native plants, pesticide-free, and you're rethinking your lawn. So this is I just added this slide last night because this was just such a cool little story. Beneficial insects are everywhere in our backyards, and we don't see them half the time. They're doing their thing, and they've done their thing for hundreds and thousands of years, and we never noticed them. So we want to welcome them into our garden. And when you spray broad spectrum pesticides, you're affecting, and herbicides in a lot of cases, you're affecting all of them. So we don't want to kill them. But there's this bug people call it the aphid lion. So you've had the skeeter hawks. Now this is called the aphid lion. And this is a little larvae who eats tons of aphids. This is a bug that does not eat plants. It eats, it's a carnivore. It eats other insects. So you want these guys, but you'd be lucky if you saw it when it looks like that, because the first time I saw this was last year, and it looked like this, a little fuzzball. And this was literally walking across my notebook as I was reading on my deck. And I took a video of it on my phone. I'm like, what the heck is this? It just like it was a little dust ball. That was what it had, all kinds of stuff sticking out of the sides of it and pieces of fuzz. And so I called a friend of mine and I said, look at this video. And she goes, I know what that is. I said, you do? She said, yeah, Google trash bug and it'll tell you what it is. She says it's actually a pollinator, but it's in the larval stage. The only way this larvae can sneak up on aphids is as it eats all these bugs, it takes what's left from the bug and it sticks it on its back. So you see it has an eye. It's not the eye of the animal. It's not the eye of the aphid lion. It's something it ate. So, and fuzz, pieces of dryer lint, it just, I'm like, how does this happen? This is so cool. This guy was in my backyard. And when it goes from the larval stage into the adult stage, this is what it looks like. It's a lacewing. And so lacewings in the larval stage are severe carnivores. They're eating all the bad bugs. And then when they turn into their adult stage, they're pollinators. And they're beautiful. I mean, look at the wings. You can see right through it. So it's a lacewing. But I test you to go Google trash bug And my friend actually calls it a pollinator in a crap jacket. So I thought that was really funny. But that's just an example of, you know, just kind of open your eyes and see what's around. Because these guys are working really hard for us, and we just don't want to kill them. So planting natives, all of these plants were taken by a friend of mine who lives in Westchester County in her backyard. And she lives in a little, a neighborhood like in Queens, where the houses are really close together. She's got a really small backyard, but her backyard and her front yard are just filled with native trees and plants and shrubs, and all these things were taken. Most of the photos in this presentation were taken by Carolyn in her backyard. And she's a perfect example of, if you plant it, they will come. So whenever I need a really cool photo, I just ask her, and she's got it right in her backyard. So why are native plants so important? And the easiest way for me to explain it to you is this story that we kind of emerged over the last couple of years, because the first project we did was planting native dogwoods 3 years ago. And we have a native dogwood called Cornus florida. This is what Fairfield's famous for. And the Cornus florida supports an entire food web, and it is the host to the Spring Azure butterfly. So our logo for the Pollinator Pathway is the Spring Azure butterfly, and that's the picture up there. And so this tree in the spring is a host, because the butterflies lay their eggs, and they turn into these little larvae caterpillars that are on the dogwood. And I don't know if you can see closely, but that caterpillar has a stripe along the side of it, and the branch of the dogwood has a stripe along the side of it. And they are meant to be together, because he's camouflaged to be on that branch. So that's an example of a native plant, a native tree, which is really important, and a native pollinator. So it not only goes to the importance of having this as a host for these pollinators, but now that there's caterpillars there, the birds will come in. And in the spring, the birds need caterpillars. A chickadee needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to grow a baby chickadee from an egg to a fledgling. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. And they're getting them from all around us, oak trees, dogwood trees. So the dogwood brings in birds, brings in butterflies, and then in the fall it gets berries, and then the birds that are migrating stop off to get the berries. So this is like a full-service native tree. It's a beautiful tree, and that's a native tree. As opposed to a tree that's not native, which is the Japanese dogwood. I have 6 of these on my property. I planted them 29 years ago because they were beautiful, and they're still beautiful. And they get those big honker red berries on them that, you know, squirrels will eat them. But if you look at that Japanese dogwood and the size of those berries, they are the perfect size to fit in the hand of the native monkeys in Japan. That's the monkeys and the dogwoods go together. Those berries go right in the hand of those native monkeys. So they're supposed to be together. The Kusa dogwood's not supposed to be here. It's pretty, it doesn't get diseases because nothing wants to eat it. That's why it doesn't get diseases. And a little side note here, it just happens to be the tree of the town of Trumbull. Just saying. Just saying. So when you look at the signs for our roads, that flower, that's a Kusa dogwood. So anyway, I'm not going to cut down my Kusa dogwoods. They're going to stay there because I think they're beautiful. But I will just add natives and shrubs and just integrate them. This is not... I have to get a monkey. I'm surprised I don't have a monkey yet because these trees are all over my property. I didn't know. I really didn't know what I didn't know. And so, you know, big part of this pollinator pathway is we're not doing any finger wagging at all because we're all learning as this goes along. We've all planted this stuff. I've all planted cultivated flowers and not known it. Here's an example, native plants versus cultivars. We go to Home Depot and we buy this beautiful coneflower called raspberry truffle, and we plant it. I've bought orange coneflowers, I've bought all kinds of colors of coneflowers, and the bees don't go there. The bees will fly right by it because they cannot fit their mouth parts into double flowers. They just can't. So we have cultivated flowers for us, because they're pretty and the color's different, but our pollinators are going right by them. And this is something that is being researched in depth right now. UConn and others have looked at this, and the University of Vermont studying it. And for another example is like the aster, the fall aster. The native one's purple. If you buy the pink one, the bees will skip right over the pink one and go to the purple one. And they're doing tests on this, and they don't know why, because they look exactly the same. They're not double flowers. It's just the color's different, and the bees will not go there. So we filled our backyards with all of these plants. And now the way I shop for plants is I look for the bees. And if the bees are on it, or butterflies are on it, or a moth is on it, that's the one I buy. Because that's the way to do it. So we're learning. This is I think probably really fuzzy, because I couldn't get a clear picture of this, but Annie White, Dr. Annie White from the University of Vermont, who is speaking in March at the event that I have on the table back there at the Native Plant Center, she's the one that's comparing our native plants with our cultivated plants. Sometimes they're called nativars. And the bee behavior around these plants. And some of the cultivars or cultivated plants are okay. Like some of them the bees will go to. And we're just trying to figure out exactly what they're looking for and what they need. And that's what we're researching. So we're all learning as we go. And where can you buy these plants? That's the challenge. Pesticide-free native plants. Wakeman's, I've had a lot of conversations with David Benjamin, and he has a ton, he's in the past few years has a ton of native plants. And if he knows that this many people were here tonight and they're gonna come this summer to buy native plants from him, he will order them, he will stock them. There's another nursery in Fairfield called Native. Gilberti's Organics in Westport, and Earth Tones, which is in Woodbury. This is something that is being worked on right now to try and propagate more local native plants. We didn't know that the Pollinator Pathway was going to create a market for this, but when you see 85 towns that have crowds like this in them, that's a huge market, and the nurseries will start stocking it. I actually even saw pollinator plants at Home Depot in Maine this past year. They had 3 species in pots that said pollinator plants. I was really very proud of them, and they were natives too. They weren't cultivated, and they don't use Home Depot does not use neonicotinoids in any of its plants anymore. So we've confirmed that that is absolutely the case. So no more. And Costco doesn't carry Roundup either anymore. So when corporations make decisions like that, that's a sea change. Things begin to change. So planting for specialists, does anybody know what kind of plant this is or flower this is? I'll give you a hint. It opens up.
Primrose.
Yeah, evening primrose. Evening primrose. It opens in the evening. This is an evening primrose moth. It goes nowhere else but the evening primrose. So it's called a specialist. It needs this plant, and the plant needs this. And what's amazing to me is it is this strawberry Turkish taffy color with the Kelly Crane eyes and the little white hat. And I'm like, why would this be the moth for this flower? And this was found in the backyard of my friend Louise Washer in Norwalk. She was going out to cut down her evening primrose because she didn't like it. And she saw this pink moth and was fascinated by what the heck is this? And she realized that all day long this moth is inside the flower. And the only thing you see is the little tip of the wing, which is kind of the same color as the flower. And the flower opens at night. So it doesn't have, it could be any color. It could be blue because you don't see it at night. So it's this awesome pink, which is actually a color that's in the stem of the plant. But she's become so obsessed with them, she goes out at night with her flashlight looking for them because she knows they're in there. We wouldn't know they were in there. I would never know they were in my evening primrose. But they're magnificent. I mean, what kind of color is? That's like, really, like, you remember that strawberry Turkish taffy that used to slam and crack? That's the color of it. I mean, who would have thought of this? But 70 to 80% of our plantings, we should really try to integrate natives. That's kind of what Doug Tallamy who I'll mention later, says is kind of the percentage. If we can get 70%, but that includes all of our oak trees. Oak trees are major league native trees. They are the larval host. You saw the dogwood as a larval host. The oak trees are a larval host for over, 435 species of moths and butterflies. How about that? So you want I always forget to bring my oak leaf. My oak leaves in the fall look like Swiss cheese. You want your oak leaves to be filled with holes, because that means that the caterpillars are eating the oak trees, and then the birds are coming to eat the caterpillars. So that's kind of what you want. So so the second part, I'm going to spend the next few minutes, next 15 minutes, going through really quickly the 6 steps of how we're going to launch this pollinator pathway. So we know what it is, we know why we're doing this, because of the declines in these populations. We know how we're going to do this. We're going to do 3 things, right? We're going to rethink our lawn, we're going to buy native plants, and we're going to avoid pesticides. So the way that we roll this out is 6 steps. Convene our team. Now, I can guarantee you there's a team in this room. Somewhere in this room are members that are going to be our team. We plan the route. In many cases, I think what we should probably do here is just have a full town pollinator pathway. Hold a kickoff event. So maybe in a couple of months what we could do is maybe have a kickoff event at a nursery at Wakeman's. He said he would have a speaker come in and we could walk and see the native plants, so we could do a kickoff there. But this is something that the team would look at. Engage community members, spread the word, and stay connected. So I'm going to do like a quick slide on each one of those. So I just kind of sat at the kitchen table yesterday and tried to think about who could be on our team. So we've got our local nursery. We've got a nature center. So we've got the Nature and Art Center. We're really lucky to have a nature center. Most towns do not have one, and they are major drivers of the pollinator education that towns need. Our conservation commissions, I've got conservation commissioners here, Kim, and our other advisory, land use advisory boards, inland wetland. Rich is here from inland wetland, so we've already got our land use teams, and there were some folks here too from planning and zoning earlier as well. So our land use boards are interested in this. Garden clubs, we're lucky we have 2 garden clubs in town. We've got the Long Hill Garden Club and we've got the Nichols Garden Club. Master gardeners. We have the Pequannock River Watershed Association. We've got 2 lakes in town. So this is just an example of what a team would look like. You'd have members from each one of these groups. Planning your route. So early on, that's the map of Trumbull on the right. When you look up the center of our town, you see where most of our really big parks are, and our Pequannock River Valley is. And so this was just kind of an idea of what our pollinator pathway could look like. It would connect down to Beardsley Zoo, who has a great pollinator pathway garden at the Beardsley Zoo. So we need to think about the watersheds, so the Pequannock River all the way down. Those tends to be protected, somewhat protected lands. You could plant for, transform the landscape along this corridor. And then going up into Monroe, our friends from Monroe are here from their Conservation Commission. As you go up Route 25, they've got a lot of open spaces there that we can connect. Or we can just say the whole town. But the first idea was, when we were designing this, was to connect across the towns. So make sure that when you draw your pollinator pathway, it reaches to Danbury and Wilton and North Salem. And being on the Conservation Commission and in this town as an elected official for many years, and I found that towns don't talk to each other. There's 169 towns. Rarely do the towns talk to each other or share information. Definitely not from a conservation perspective. But what we're finding with these pollinator pathways, towns are talking to each other because they're looking at maps and they're saying, hey, your river goes through my town too. Let's work together and plan volunteers. You have a corporation in your town, maybe they'll buy plants for all of us, and so you can share resources and publicize each other events and connect the landscape by connecting the people first. Number 3, hold a kickoff event. On the right, that was a kickoff event in Darien. They had this at their garden center in Darien, which is a completely organic garden center, and the employees dressed up like bees, which we thought was really cute. And then they had beer and wine, and they set up a screen, and we had a little bit of a talk about the Pollinator Pathway. And on the left was the very first, 3 years ago, that was the kickoff event in Wilton. We had 2 speakers that came. And there were a lot of people there, just like tonight. So we can plan that for sometime this year. Number 4, engage community members, corporate partners, town stakeholders, and staff. So we have some pretty good corporations in town, Unilever, and a lot of these companies have sustainability departments. And those are the people who, if we can track them down and say, hey, we've got this town-wide initiative, would you guys like to help us pay for plants or plant? And usually they have really young, strong millennials working in these companies to come and dig holes. I mean, it's fun to have Cub Scouts, but they usually get distracted and walk away when the ice cream truck comes. But if we can get the companies to come and bring volunteers and money, that's cool. There's a plant sale. I just saw that picture of an outdoor plant sale, and that reminded me of here on Town Hall, having a big plant sale on the grounds of Town Hall during the art festival in the fall. And then I was thinking about some potential sites here in Trumbull. Twin Brooks Park, of course, Dimitri and I talked about that being ground zero, because it's been, under construction, waiting for metamorphosis for many years, and I think it's ready to go. Old Mine Park, a few years ago, we did a riparian buffer, or a riverside buffer there. That's all native plants. That's another site that's already planted. Pequannock River, the Long Hill Greens, under a lot of construction now. There's new restaurants coming in there, and if we can get our friends in inland wetland and planning and zoning to ask the developers to integrate native plants and pollinator plants. Already inland wetland mandates native plants, so bravo to you. And also a 100-foot setback from wetlands, which not every town goes 100-foot setback from rivers and streams. So we have the opportunity, when the developers come in for applications, to ask them to plant native plants. Town halls and Tashua Golf Course. We've got folks here from the Tashua Knolls Golf Course who are working towards certification by the Audubon International. And they just showed me, you want to hold up the sign that you guys just got? I'm so proud. I'm so proud that this golf course is in our town. There's a program called Monarchs in the Rough, and they're working towards certification. So Knolls there, and last year they had all of these fish tanks in the lobby with the chrysalis of monarchs in the lobby of the golf course house. So the golfers came in and actually could watch the metamorphosis of these butterflies. And so how many did you end up releasing? Like 20?
About 20, yeah.
I mean, on a golf course. That's amazing, because they're changing the way they manage their golf course. They're changing what they use. They're planting more native plants. They're changing their practices a little bit at a time. And and I know that there's folks who they want that golf course meticulous, but if it's toxic, you don't want you have to weigh the benefits. But Tashua Knolls is doing some amazing things, so I'm very excited that our golf course is going to be on our Pollinator Pathway. So containers in town. Now, if we had a main street, we could do pots like this up and down Main Street. But I think Long Hill Green, some of those shops, just a container like this, 2 feet by 4 feet, pollinator plants in them, 3 species for each season, so that you have a series of blooms from spring to fall. I have a list back there of plants that can go in here, and see that has a Pollinator Pathway sign stuck in there. And then spread the word. Trumbull Times, Connecticut Magazine, all of the blogs we have in town, Inside Trumbull, Outside Trumbull, Trumbull Upside Down, Trumbull Moms, Trumbull Parents. spread the word through there. And in the bottom you see the, those are the brochures. So each town typically makes its own brochure. The template for the brochure is free. We have it on our website, and all you do is add your name, and then you add a couple of local pictures into it. And it's just a really nice piece. It's a nice mailing piece. It's a nice piece to have at events. So that's something that's really easy for us to do. Another way to spread the word, and I'm sure Vicki would be all over this, is like what the town of Newtown did. They had a proclamation that you know, we could have a proclamation, 2020 is the year of the pollinator in Trumbull, and Vicki could sign this, and it would be great. A lot of towns have done this. Westport's done this, Newtown has done this as well. And what Westport also came up with was this pledge. So there's a town pledge and the proclamation. We have the pledge on the back table, and it's just asking you to commit to doing your best to plant native plants, avoid those pesticides, and rethink your lawn, and buy one of our signs and put it on your mailbox post, and instead of those yellow signs. That's what we'd rather see, is this sign instead of the yellow signs. But it's just, you know, once people sign their name to this, and then we can plug the addresses onto a map of the town, and we can see where all the sites are on the Pollinator Pathway. And finally, stay connected. There is one website, pollinator-pathway.org. I would encourage you to go on it. It is the most beautiful website I've ever seen. And each town, there is a menu that you pull down for towns on the Pollinator Pathway. And each town is on there. You click on the town, and it lists events in the town. It lists the contact people in the town. So you actually have your own page on pollinator-pathway.org. Yard signs, you can buy the yard signs on this website. So, and all of the PDFs or resources I have on the table there, or the handouts, are in electronic version on the website, so you can print them out. Like these, like this is, which is on the table. This list was developed by our queen bee, Kim Stoner, at the agriculture station. These are the best pollinators, the best wildflowers for pollinators in a sequence of blooms all year. On the back, if you flip it over, it's Doug Tallamy's list of trees, and the New York Botanical Gardens list of native shrubs. So for example, the queen bees are going to start coming out of the ground in another month or so. So if you think about that and plant early blooming shrubs and some early blooming spring ephemerals, she'll have something to eat and get the pollen that she can go back in and make the nest, and then the bumblebees will be here. So the spring queen bees are probably one of the most important things for us to plant for. And then coming up on May 5th, I actually, my job that actually pays me is at the Aspetuck Land Trust. I'm the Director of Landowner Outreach. So I set up programs in the Aspetuck region, and this one is coming May 5th, which is Cinco de Mayo. And if you're not familiar with Doug Tallamy, I would encourage you to go on Amazon or a bookstore and get Bringing Nature Home, which is like the Bible for planting native plants, and what caterpillars show up and the birds that show up. And it's just a great book. He is an incredible lecturer. He's funny and engaging, and he has a new book that's coming out this month called Nature's Best Hope. So at the Westport Library, if you've never been there, it'll knock your socks off. It's an incredible library, but it holds up to 400 people for a lecture, and that's what we're counting on will come to hear Doug Tallamy speak. So I like this quote from him: to share suburbia with wildlife, we need to create corridors, connecting natural areas. That's what we're doing. Reduce the area now in lawn and begin to transition from alien ornamentals to native ornamentals, which is exactly what we're doing. So we're following the law of biodiversity by Doug Tallamy. So what's next for us? We've got to create our team. We've got to plan a launch event, outreach to neighbors and families. A bio blitz is something on the next slide that is an opportunity for us. And then we've got a couple of conferences coming up. There's a Northeast Pollinator Pathway Conference, which we decided we needed a a state conference at up in Danbury at Western Connecticut State University, June 11th. And there are a couple other programs back there. One's Plant for the Queens, which is going to be at Earth Place in March 18th, 19th. We're having 2 speakers. One from the Xerces Society. So the Xerces Society is the bee society. Emily May is an excellent speaker. And then Jim Search from the L. Peabody Museum. We're going to talk about planting for the queens. And the June Bio Blitz, what this is hopefully we can engage the school children and us to download iNaturalist onto our phones if we have a smartphone. Join the project called Pollinator Pathways, which you see on the lower area. And all you do is walk around photographing pollinators. And you send it into iNaturalist, and it logs the photos, it defines the species, and then it'll put it on the map for you. And so if we do this in the month of June, it would be really cool, because Trumbull will be on the map then. iNaturalist is a national app. And it's really a really cool app just to have to see what's showing up in your backyard, like those garbage trash bugs. Take a picture of a trash bug and see what it is. So this is a project that has also emerged from the Pollinator Pathway, because we realized we didn't have enough native plants. So we're working with Connecticut Native Plant Working Group, which I sit on, Aspetuck Land Trust, which I work for, the Connecticut Ag Station, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, and a whole bunch of farms. One that's near and dear to my heart is Gilberti's in Easton. He has pledged to begin to propagate native plants for us. He's the herb guy. He's got all, he's the little teat edibles. He's an organic farm. So we need an organic farm that can propagate native plants for us. So he's committed to start with 12 species of native plants. And that picture is kind of all of us on the team up at farm in Ridgefield called the Hickories. And those are founders plots. So we wild collected plants, certified and legally collected wild seeds, and propagated them on this farm. We're going to collect the seeds, bring them to Gilberti's, and he's going to put them into flats to sell. So we will have native plants that will the species will continue to increase year after year. So we're hoping, and we had to come up with a logo that we could stick on a stick in the plants. So just to wrap up, this initiative has just taken off from just a couple of people having an idea and getting together and looking at maps and very carefully curating science-based information and developing a website. And it took courage, but when we worked in a group, it was fun. And to go out to towns that I have never been to before, like Simsbury's really far, if you don't know. It's really far. And I was amazed to come out into the woods, and there were 80 people there waiting to hear about pollinators. So it takes a lot of courage, and but it's just been an increase in people who are just passionate about this. And I love this definition of courage. The world looks to leaders to model courage. When your passion overtakes your fear, courage emerges. Courage is acting in the face of fear, standing up for the truth, being willing to take a risk, and actively making a difference. And to me, that typifies this pollinator pathway, because we all saw there was something going on. We were upset by it. We felt like we had no control over this. And we said, well, we can whine and wring our hands, or we can do something. So let's do this. And it has totally spread across the state. And, we never knew that. We were just so excited to be in Connecticut Magazine in September. And it's just taking off. And the beauty of it is, what we do, it's Louise and I. It's 2 of us that go out across the state and we launch these in towns, and then we leave. And rarely do we hear from anybody again. They just take it and run, because they know their teams, they know how their town works, they add the flavor of their town to the pollinator pathway, and they just do it. So once they have the access to the tools, it's really easy for them. So the thing that is exciting about Trumbull is I live here, so I can help you. But I really like this. I just felt that the secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but building the new. So we're all very